I am Jackie Ferranchuli for Gators Territory. Alongside me is the Athletics Will Salmon and Gainesville Sun's Graham Hall. And we're back with On the Beat. Now, it's been a while since we've talked. And instead of just diving right into the Florida State game, let's talk about where this team is right now. You know, coming into the season, they had some higher expectations from last year after winning 10 games. It's always harder to win more than 10 games in the second year. It's harder to win that 11th game, that 12th game. So coming into this last regular season game, Will, did you expect Florida to be in this position?
At the beginning of the year, say like in the beginning of the calendar year in January, when guys were talking about being back in Atlanta for, the college football playoff semifinal as opposed to a bowl game, guys on the team were talking about that. I kind of didn't buy quite that much as far as expectations go. I thought it was kind of cool that they were actually talking about it, though, and that sort of signaled to me that they believed in themselves and they believed that they were able to have a really successful year. Wins and losses wise, I thought this would be maybe a 9-3 type of season, 10-2 at the best. So they're in line with sort of what I expected. But for me, what I thought would happen was that they would stumble. They would have one of those bad losses that we're accustomed to seeing, whether that would be a Missouri on the road, that was probably my guess, or maybe Auburn for that matter earlier in the year. But I just felt like maybe they would have that stumble where it was going to be one of those losses that could have gone either way. But to their credit, this was a very much more mature team, a very different team in that aspect than maybe a year ago or in previous years for Florida's program. And so they really denied themselves that sort of setback, and they overcame any sort of idea of that, and they've gone to have or position themselves at least for a 10-win season, which is pretty big. I think that's very big for Florida when you put that in historical perspective of, there aren't too many guys who have accomplished that within 2 years, and Dan Mullen could put himself in really significant territory if that were to happen.
Yeah, for sure. That especially where, Dan Mullen took the team. It was a 4-win season coming into it, and then he's getting his opportunity to get 2 10-win seasons, and not even including the bowl game this year. Graham, we both kind of agreed coming into this season. I understand Will's point. I always was fearful of that game at South Carolina and that game at Missouri. I always felt like those two could have potentially been a trap game that, years past Florida might have lost. But coming into the season, both of us had the same type of prediction. We predicted a 2-loss team losing to both LSU and Georgia. And seeing this team, although we predicted those 2 games as losses, do you feel like the progress the team has made is what you expected?
It's been different, but I think it's been, you can acknowledge it. I think that a lot of people wouldn't have expected Kyle Trask to do what he did. I think most of those 10-2 predictions were based off of Felipe Franks taking that leap, being that 3,000-yard quarterback that many people thought that he could be and put it all together. And how many expected, I think, would have thought that they would meet that 10-2 benchmark with Kyle Trask, with a backup quarterback, having to start multiple freshmen at some spots. Not many expected Kyle Pitts to make that resurgence at tight end that Dan Mullen talked so often about when he got to Gainesville. So I certainly think that there are some surprises, but I think that many people have made the comparison, I think rightfully so, to Jim McElwain's first 2 years in Gainesville. That second year in 2016 where he went 9-4, and many people say that if it wasn't for the weather, he would be in that 10-win back-to-back category. I think if you're watching the games, it feels just much different. Offensively, this team feels like they trust the play calling. Dan Mullen has often talked about tailoring his offense around what his players do best, and I think that you're seeing that not only with Kyle Trask, but with LaMichael Pirine. The run game never got going for Florida this year, and if you look back at the stats, not many people would have said, offensively they'd be that good with having a running game that was outside the hundreds. So certainly I think that when you find ways that Florida got production from LaMichael Pirine, they spread the ball around to the wide receivers, something that I think people were skeptical about them doing with that much talent, and they could really evenly distribute the ball. When you see all those things, you see that Dan Mullen had a resounding success in a lot of ways when a lot of things could have gone wrong in years past, and I think that's overall what people highlight. There's a lot of ways this team could have stumbled. If the Georgia game had gone as miserably as it did in years past, Florida really could have lost those games to Missouri, maybe even Vanderbilt. I mean, I think people forget last year they were down 21-3 at Vanderbilt before the Georgia game. So certainly I think that this team has learned how to win, and that is the most impressive aspect of it.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of moments this year that could have gone wrong for Florida. Felipe Franks going down, Kyle Trask coming in, that comeback win against Kentucky. Sort of those emotional games. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we might have been talking about a team fighting for a bowl game. One of the best things that I heard on Monday was when someone at the press conference asked Dan Mullen about, trying to game plan around not having a run game, and he just said sassily, choose other plays. And he did, and that's something that has really helped Florida. We were able to see Kyle Trask's strength, because I always maintain that Trask fits this particular offense anyways, maybe more so than Felipe Franks, just because it just happens that the strength of this offense was always the wide receivers. And again, Dan Mullen was very sassy on Monday. I really like this response when he asked, don't you want a balanced offense? Well, I thought we did have a balanced offense. A lot of our receivers got a lot of the receptions. So when you look towards this team and you see the guys that are leaving, well, I mentioned those wide receivers. A lot of those wide receivers are graduating this year. That's a lot of loss for that offense. What do you see the future of that offense, Will?
We could get into a whole big discussion about the quarterback if you wanted to, but it's kind of interesting because like the guys who are leaving, it's not just like the fact that they're wide receivers. They're wide receivers who do like what Kyle Trask does well, and that's hit those short passes, hit those slants. It's Freddie Swain, Josh Hammond, Van Jefferson, all those guys. What they're really good at is running the routes and really on those intermediate throws, those quick slants, those hitches, that sort of thing. You see Grimes, for example, a guy who people think is probably going to come back as a junior, or you would probably assume unless he says something otherwise. He does do some of that stuff, but it's really the other three guys who that's their trademark, like that's their go-to. And so you look at it and it's like, wow. Maybe the personnel sets up even better for Emory Jones, for that matter, just because it'll be a little bit different of a team. And so you don't know. But it is a credit to like what Dan has done with this particular group. And you could also even look at it defensively. I mean, like with Jabari Zuniga missing most of the year. I mean, who had, like what Graham was saying, like with Felipe Franks. I mean, I had Felipe Franks and Jabari Zuniga as two of the five most important players of this team heading into the year. And if you were to tell me this team wins 10 games without really those two for the majority of the season, if not the entire season, I would have had a very hard time believing that. So offensively, yeah, they've made it work, but also defensively, they've had a couple of bad games, notably against LSU and Georgia, but the other games have been really stout and pretty impressive. So they've worked with what they have. And to piggyback on another one of Graham's points about the difference between, say, the McElwain years and Mullen years, that's really the biggest difference, I feel like, is just the maximizing of talent on the roster. So that kind of bodes well when you assume that they're going to be recruiting at a higher level in years to come, too.
So you said that Emory Jones might fit the offense better next season, but
I got myself in trouble now.
Yeah, you got yourself in trouble because you're just assuming Felipe Franks is leaving, Will?
No, that's the thing, right? Like I said before, we could kind of talk like a whole hour about just the quarterback position. Maybe they'll bring in a transfer and make it even more interesting. That'd be really fun. But yeah, I think that they have options, and I think Dan Mullen is in a position where that's where he wants to be because he's, as we've already learned in 2 years at Florida, he loves saying that we have a competition at quarterback. Well, he's going to have a competition at quarterback. It's going to be a fierce one, it looks like. So that's something that he probably likes, and definitely the biggest thing in the offseason to keep track of, no doubt.
Yeah, for sure. And Graham, I know we can dive into this quarterback discussion for maybe like a straight hour, like Will said. But in your opinion, when you look at this offense and you see how much they progressed, what Dan Mullen has done with the playmakers, what are something that stand out for you this season? Especially, the seniors that are leaving. I think a lot of these skilled players really were the center, the nucleus for Dan Mullen to kind of turn around this program.
Yeah, I think people are kind of finding out how much Freddie Swain and Josh Hammond have meant to this football team. I think that there was a little bit of a tendency to cast those guys off and forget about them and say that they're kind of McElwain type guys, which, maybe there's some truth to that. I think that a lot of people rightfully were very excited about Van Jefferson and Trevon Grimes arriving back in Gainesville, but they forgot that in the year before that, Hammond and Swain led Florida with 40 receptions each. So certainly you look at those two guys, I think that this year proved that you don't have to be the most talented or highly regarded wide receiver. If you focus on, route running, developing every single week, you can be a top receiver in the SEC. And we'll have to see next year. I think Will made a very good point about Dan Mullen. I spoke about him getting the most out of his players and maximizing their potential. I'm interested to see what this offense looks like next year. I think that it's going to be a lot more conducive towards the run, but if Florida's offensive line isn't there in spring, I really am interested to see what this team does. Brian Johnson, who didn't really make the list for top quarterback coaches. I think we all may disagree with that. It's going to be really kind of a prove-it year for him in a sense of seeing how he gets Emory Jones to the next level and helps Florida get their run game back if he is the guy at quarterback. But like Will said, there's certainly a competition to be had, and if you're fans of Florida's offense, you may want to enjoy this game right here.
I think Florida fans are angry with a number of lists this last week. Kyle Pitts being omitted from the McKay list, and then Ray Guy Award, Tommy Townsend is not a finalist. So I don't think Gator Nation is very happy this week when it comes to those lists. But let's get to the game. Florida State, Florida. Florida State it's chaotic. They're still looking for a coach. Odell Haggins is their interim head coach, but they do have talented players on that roster. Guys like Cam Akers. What do you see about this Florida State team that stands out to you, Will?
Cam Akers. I mean, Cam Akers is, I was in Mississippi covering Cam Akers' high school career, actually. He is by far the best high school athlete I've ever covered or been around. So I have a lot of respect for what he's able to do. And I think the entire defense of Florida said the same on Monday night when they spoke to us. And they sort of listed just a couple of players, and they stopped at Cam Akers, and they gave him a lot of respect and kind of outlined the fact that he is their guy. Outside of that, I mean, there really isn't a whole lot that should scare you, I feel like, from a Florida perspective when you're looking at Florida State, other than the fact that they're kind of playing with house money, and that, I mean, they're the team that's a 18, 17-point underdog. They have really nothing to lose. They're expected to lose the game, of course, by a lot. But what I mean is that they don't have a whole lot of pressure. I mean, you could also argue that they're maybe even playing for Odell, and they're playing with that chip on their shoulder for at least the beginning of the game before, a series gets in, and that stuff tends to not matter as much. But, yeah, I mean, like, you look at it, and it's like it's not a team that exactly scares you from a personnel standpoint. There's just that little bit in the back of your mind that, okay, these guys are playing. They have the opportunity to play with sort of like an aggressive behavior, maybe even like a recklessness to them that is a little bit different than, say, a team that is kind of pressing to make plays or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. And the players are very vocal in their support for Odell. That's the guy that they really are vocal on social media wanting to become the new head coach at Florida State. Graham, obviously, everyone's going to talk about Akers. What is something that stands out to you? Obviously, Florida really wants this win over Florida State, not just because it's their rivals. They're going to have high-quality recruits on campus, but it's going to possibly be the first time they beat Florida State if they were to win for the first time in 10 years.
Yeah, I would hope that is the primary motivation. None of these guys were really playing football at a competitive level the last time Florida beat Florida State in games.
Josh Hammond was visiting.
Yeah, I mean, they were looking around and thinking about what middle school to go to. So certainly a lot of these guys, I think that they would be motivated by that. We mentioned all the fact to get to 10 wins, the fact that they could be playing for a New Year's Six Bowl with this game. There's certainly no lack of motivation. I mean, that's before you even factor in what may happen Saturday night, when you factor in the recruits in town, how much this game really matters for in-state recruiting and keeping Dan Mullen ahead of Florida and Miami, Florida State and Miami right now. So certainly I think that would be added motivation. But I think the number one thing that stands out to me about Florida State is their unpredictableness. I don't think you can really take too much away from what they've done this season because it was under Willie Taggart and it was under so much mismanagement. I think Kendall Briles' role in the offense, running the offense, is a lot more clear. I don't think we'll see as much rotating of the quarterbacks. I think that added chip on your shoulder element that Will mentioned may be a little more of a factor than I think Florida fans want to think. There's a lot of Florida State players who did not forget, the way that things went down in Tallahassee last year with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, the flag plant. I mean, those guys were weeping, let's call it how it is, on the sideline in the fourth quarter when Florida was up by 25 points. So certainly I think that there's an element for Florida to be kind of caught resting on their laurels and embracing the moment and looking towards senior day. But I do think that after that initial surge by Florida State, that Florida will get things together and drop a 40-burger on Florida State.
No, I can guess all of our predictions for the game. It's probably unanimous to Florida, all three of us.
All upsets?
So instead of me doing a prediction like we normally do for the game, how about a bowl game prediction? Which bowl game do you think Florida will get, Will?
I'm going to go probably with the Cotton Bowl right now. I know they could match up where they kind of go to the Orange Bowl. That may be a little bit more conceivable, but my money, I'll probably bet on the Cotton Bowl just because it's the one that I probably don't want to go to. So probably just reverse psychology on that one.
And that would be the bowl that Florida, if they were to be chosen, would play the Group of Five champion, most likely Memphis. So that is that game for Cotton Bowl. I'm kind of with you. I honestly do not want to go to the Cotton Bowl. I think they might get I think the Orange Bowl is probably the one I would pick. I think Florida Virginia is the game that I can see playing the Orange Bowl. Obviously, that all depends if Virginia can beat Virginia Tech for the first time in nearly 20 years. I think it's like 14 or 15 years since Virginia beat the Hokies. I should. That was my previous beat, and I still don't remember. That's how far along it's been. I don't even remember last time Virginia beat Virginia Tech. So I think it's going to be the Orange Bowl. What do you think, Graham? Where do you think the bowl game?
I'm with Will probably on the Cotton Bowl. You know, I think that the Orange Bowl would be great. Obviously, the one thing about the Cotton Bowl, I don't know this off the top of my head, but I think they're certainly going to look at ticket sales from when Florida was there in 2017 playing Michigan, just to see how that Florida fan base traveled. I think that's a very interesting thing to look at because I think that will be a factor.
So just so people understand, so let's say if the top four stays the same and Georgia will go to the playoffs, that means Alabama is out of it. So Alabama would go to the Sugar Bowl. Yes, Alabama will go to the Sugar Bowl, and then the next SEC team would most likely go to the Orange Bowl. So that one is basically an ACC team. Usually it's the highest ranked team, but in this case, since Clemson's going to playoffs and there's no ranked ACC team, they would kind of choose their ACC team, and a lot of people expect the Coastal winner, which if Virginia beats Virginia Tech would be the Coastal winner, or Virginia Tech, Virginia, they would be the Coastal winner. They would go to that game. And then they would pick the best out of Notre Dame, the Big 12, the Big 10, and the SEC. And if it all says the same, I know. And if that stays the same, Florida would get that pick. And then with the Cotton Bowl that you guys both picked, they usually go next and they pick the highest ranked team of the remaining teams. So that's the order of everything goes down. So if you want a particular bowl, you might want Alabama to go into the playoffs. If not two SEC teams don't make the playoffs, that gets a little more confusing, especially if Oklahoma loses in the next game or one or two games. There's a lot of things that could happen, but those are the three rules that you'll all be following. So I actually wrote about this. It's on Gators Territory. Wrote down all the scenarios and all the remaining schedule, so you can take a look on GatorsTerritory.com about the full breakdown of all the bowl game projections. But thanks so much, Will, and thank you so much, Graham. And obviously go to Gators Territory for all the latest, heading up to the Florida State matchup.